More and more people these days are interested in coming along to a Buddhist centre and learning to meditate, but a worry that very often comes up for them is this just escapism? So I'm going to explore a little bit today, is meditation escapism? And I'm going to start with a story from when I was already meditating and a Buddhist some years ago. I was with my mother and I made a passing reference to anxiety, or that something made me anxious. I can't remember what it was. Simply mentioned anxiety, and she said, "Oh, you mean you still get anxious even though you meditate?" And I realised that quite commonly there's a view that meditation will basically help you get rid of all of your uncomfortable experience. To me, something a little bit more paradoxical and a little bit more interesting was already clear, which is that turning towards uncomfortable experience is going to be a big part of meditation, even though it's not all of it. And a very positive development for a lot of people is being able to simply notice, admit, name a not very skillful, not very pleasant mental state like anxiety, which frankly everybody experiences at least from time to time, unless they're a Buddha. Actually, one of the effects of taking up a life of meditation is that the turbulence in your experience can go up, not down. Sorry if that's a disappointment to you. Personally, I was quite pleased about it. It meant that life was getting more exciting. I was looking more at what my experience is really like, and I think becoming a bit less escapist, because escapism really is to do with a tendency always to be looking for distraction. Of course, if you know the first thing about meditation, you know that it's about trying not to be distracted, at least for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you're doing that day, and taking up the habit of no longer looking for distraction. So you try to get out of the habit of looking for distractions all the time. It doesn't work straight away. Another little story. Last week I had a free evening, hour or two to spare, let's say. The house was quiet. What did I do? I went onto Netflix. I watched an episode of something called Designated Survivor, which already sounds pretty silly, doesn't it? I think it was kind of silly. Quite big budget, in some ways quite impressive program. It's another White House drama. It's about where the president and all of his senior staff get blown up. So a junior minister who's been ensconced somewhere else safely suddenly becomes president. And what does he do? How do his family find it? How does he sort it all out? Okay, kind of entertaining, ultimately dull. Didn't add to my life afterwards. I did not feel elevated. What did I feel like I'd done? I'd wasted time. Of course, it's kind of harmless, but what I realised I had done is looked for a way to kill time. I wanted to kill an hour. What does that mean? It means I didn't want to be aware. Unfortunately, I'm not positive enough yet to sit and look at the wall for an hour that evening instead and be in a state of bliss. I wish I was. But I do think I need to admit that I was being escapist, and that was nothing to do with my meditation practice. In fact, it's the opposite. When we're killing time and opting to be unaware, I think that we're probably avoiding situations in our life where we could go beyond a present limitation, realising something a bit deeper about the human predicament, or just being more deeply aware, whatever that might mean. Probably what I could have done is improved or refined my distraction a bit, lit a candle or two, read a good book, and I do sometimes manage to do that in case that reassures you. So when we're doing that, when we are being escapist, which is probably not during our sessions of meditation on the cushion, what is it we're avoiding? I think that we're avoiding the dissatisfaction of knowing that our life is limited. I don't mean that it's going badly necessarily. I mean that it might be defined by a job that we find dull, even a career we've really given ourselves to but we don't feel is actually us, superficial friendships and social life, perhaps a limiting romantic relationship. But that dissatisfaction, that awareness of those limitations, isn't that something you want to cultivate? Because it could mean so much for you. And those limitations, isn't that something you want to escape? Isn't that suffering? Knowing that you could be so much more than you are. And I think deep down, all of us probably knows that. However well my life is going and has been going so far, it's possible to become a Buddha. It's possible to become a radiant, enlightened being with no limitation, no possibility of falling back into the slightest mental form of suffering, even though bodily pain, of course, doesn't go away. If a friend was telling you a story about their house catching fire and saying smoke was billowing out all the windows, the door frames were starting to collapse, everything was molten concrete and metal, but I managed to get out, would you stop them and say, "Excuse me a sec, that all sounds fine, but I think that was a bit escapist of you"? No, you probably wouldn't. You'd say, "Thank goodness you escaped." You'd want your friend to have escaped. If you were in that situation, it's not just that you'd want to escape, you just naturally would. You'd get out while you could. So is escaping a burning house escapist? Probably not. So we always need to distinguish between escape and escapism. Like I'm saying, escapism, looking for distractions all the time, killing time, opting to be unaware. Escape, getting out of a situation that you know is limiting for you, and ultimately that also means for others. Not long after the Buddha's enlightenment, he was talking to 1,000 disciples of his that used to be fire worshippers. So they had a sect of worshipping fire, probably gazed at fires, made sacrifices to fires. The Buddha used the metaphor of the fire that they worshipped, turned it round on them and said, "Monks, everything is burning." So he meant not just your sacrificial fires, everything's burning. Burning with the fire of lust, with the fire of hatred, with the fire of ignorance. And when you realize this, you become disenchanted. So the Buddha is saying that these three poisons, or these three fires, and this is an extremely radical message, the actual problems are greed, hatred, and delusion. And if you can withdraw from those, if you can escape from those, you'll be doing the opposite of ordinary escapism. You'll actually be setting yourself free. To borrow another metaphor he used, you can be liberated, set free from prison, can't you? And it's one better than escaping from prison, as far as I know, is actually being let out of prison. He said that becoming enlightened is like being one set free from a prison. There's no further debt, nothing hanging over you, complete freedom in your body and mind. And he was saying to these former fire worshippers, you can do that if you become disenchanted with the hot, crackly, burning fires of your own greed, hatred, and delusion, because those issues are in your own mind. It isn't just saying the world out there is on fire, which is like saying the world has problems, which is so obviously true, there's hardly any point saying it. He's saying the world is on fire with the suffering inside the individual mind, and you need to withdraw from that. It's very interesting to me, he uses this term disenchanted. When you realize that that's the source of suffering, you'll become disenchanted. If you're enchanted by something, it means it's cast a spell over you. You believe it. You're in its thrall. In our day, I suppose that means I think I can solve a slightly bored or slightly lonely or slightly listless moment by, guess what? Picking out my phone, okay? Seeing if there's a message or some ping from some app that I want because it helps me get through that moment back into some other experience, and I don't have to think about things. We're enthralled to these old spells. The old spells in new forms, which quite often are digital devices, allow us to think we can escape into that glowing phone screen for whatever it takes, maybe it's half a minute, and get through this discomfort. A life of meditation is saying, don't opt for that. Yes, you've got to go into the discomfort, but no, that's not a whole path. It's not just about turning towards suffering in the famous phrase. You need to turn towards it to start with because you need to actually get to know what's your experience like. That's always the first question when you sit down to meditate. There are two elements to any life of meditation. The first is, what's the raw material of my experience right now? The second is, how do I evolve from that place? I can't do that evolving part if I haven't got to know what place am I in, what's it like, what's my mental state, how am I doing today, what habits have I been cultivating, where's that left my mind? When the old spells don't work anymore, we're completely disenchanted, it's not just that we'll be free of an hour of forgettable Netflix or a load of phone swiping, it's that we'll be free even of the possibility of backsliding from a radiant, quite beautiful, wise awareness. It's now impossible to slide back out of that. That's what's represented by the Buddha. That's what the Buddha mind is said to be like. So, is meditation escapism? It's probably clear by now. I would say no. Escapism is killing time and opting not to be aware. So don't go for that kind of escapism. Go instead for escape, real escape. Get away from a flattened world of no real value that you know you don't feel at ease in, you don't feel fulfilled in, and see if you can set yourself free from that via a life of meditation into a world of true value and vividness, the world that we know really exists somewhere, probably very close to where we are now, if only we can remove that barrier, that wall that's in the way, which really exists in our own mind. And that is what meditation is there to address. So if you've benefited from this video, maybe you can help others find it by liking the video. Make sure you get more of the same type of content by subscribing to the channel. But of course, that can be all just more screen prodding and swiping. So best of all, come to the London Buddhist Centre and learn to meditate with us. If you live far away from London, why not book a retreat? That's a really good way to go much more deeply into your experience, discover this vivid world I've been talking about in good company.